See, this is obviously a SaaS conference, so I thought I should put some slides together, which talks about the necessary things that as a SaaS founder you must do, and some of the things that as investors, what is that we look for, right? Um, so yeah, just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Kiran, partner at Kalaari. Prior to this, I spent a decade at Paytm. And because it's a decade and a startup like Paytm, you end up doing many things. So Paytm was initially a SaaS company to begin with, and then it pivoted to consumer tech and then to fintech. So that's the journey. In fact, I was just talking to one of my colleagues in the recent reports that came out. We did launch a small device called Soundbox. Today, in less than 3 years, those revenues are around close to $150 million. So yeah, I think I saw some of the previous speakers, including Bala, talk about GTM. And I firmly believe that GTM is a necessary thing that one should focus on. When we meet early stage founders, they generally end up talking mostly product, right? But I rarely see founders who have a clear plan in place as far as GTM is concerned. Now, you can go wrong as far as plan is concerned, but the key thing is to have some plan rather than just thinking that we'll first get 2-3 clients and then we'll figure out which markets to go after and should we have US GTM in place or not. But I think it's important that you put it in a more structured manner rather than just thinking it, okay, let's figure out as we go along. So talking about the GTM itself, and that's where the PMF, I won't talk much about it in detail because I saw Bala speaking mostly on PMF, but I do want to emphasize one point is that as far as GTM is concerned, more often than not, where people go wrong is before even the PMF is established, they start talking about expansion, right? We see many companies, and especially in the SaaS startups, because rightly said that the market for SaaS companies is beyond India. And that's because the potentiality of those customers to pay premium to your product, right? Having said that, it is important that you first test your product and ensure that it is on the right path before you open these markets for you, right? Whether you talk about opening new markets or new channels, you have to test the product first, right? If you don't do it, and what I especially think is 70 to 80% of the companies go wrong when they have not established the PMF, but they end up expanding the sales and marketing efforts and realizing that after 2 years, whatever they have done doesn't make any sense. You can't go back from that. And that's where, most of the startups fail. So, my quick 2 cents on this is, first, figure out what's the right product positioning is, right? And I also see many founders, when they come up, obviously, you see there are some products or solutions which cater to niche areas where there is no competition. More often than not, you will always find competitors, right? But when you ask them what is the real differentiation or how is your positioning going to be different, the answer is not clear, or probably they are not able to articulate it well. So it's very, very important that you know what your product positioning is from day one. Now, it could be that the differentiation is not on features, it is just on pricing, or it could be on customer support, that you are able to give them better customer service. But you should know what is your differentiation, why people will opt for your product when there are 10 other products which are there. So that clarity, that what is the product positioning, what's the true differentiation, is very, very important. When it comes to competition, see, I always talk about it. There was Yahoo had search before Google came in, right? And some 2-3 founders started developing search, and today we all know where Google is. And Google had the Messenger, or let's say social network, and then Facebook came in. Facebook had Messenger, then WhatsApp arrived, right? What does it say is it's never the amount of funding, it's never the size of the company. What matters is whether you're able to execute it well or not. And I took some global examples, but if you talk about Indian examples, there are far many companies who with little bit of funding have achieved what companies with $1 billion couldn't have achieved. So never be afraid of companies or about the size of the companies that you're going to compete with. What you should be worrying is whether your product has it in it, what it takes to become a winning product, right? So I think these are the key things that you should look at. And distribution and marketing channel, there are many versions to it, and some of the previous speakers have talked about it, but if you look at it, every product will be different. So what works for someone else might not work for you. You have to understand what's the pricing going to be. What are your key target customers that you're going to go after in the first few days or first few months or first few quarters. And accordingly, you have to figure out which is the best channel mix that you want to go after. And at the end of the day, at a mature scale, I think all companies will have some bits and pieces of every channel that exists. But in the first few years where you won't have the luxury of capital to experiment too many things, you have to better be in a position where you're taking the right steps. So figure out what is the right channel for you. Talk to your co-founders of other startups, but you have to take that decision basis certain understanding, research, and that's where when you go back to GTM plan, you will realize that what is the first few set of customers you want to go after, and accordingly you will devise the plan which fits into what kind of sales channels, what's the marketing strategy going to look like, whether you're going to hire people, salespeople or not. So, you have to plan from day one, and that's precisely the point which I wanted to make here. And again, on the pricing as well, it's not just about, freemium models or, pay-per-use model. You have to figure out your own way. And as long as, there was an interesting question previously, people said, what to do with POCs? Well, there are various ways to tackle it. I think you can keep the POC free for 2 months, post which there is a forced conversion, right? There are various ways to deal with it. Obviously, you don't have to say no to a free POCs, because if the enterprise is too large and sometimes you need 3-4 big logos on your decks to convince the next set of customers. And if that is the case, you should not hesitate to do a free POC, but for first few months, and then you say there's a forced conversion. Again, there's nothing wrong with saying pricing it or not, but it depends on what stage of the growth or of the journey you are in. And there is nothing like one specific thing that will fit every startup. So what might work for a 100 million ARR company would be different from what a $10 million startup should be doing. See, the next thing which I'm going to talk about is the key, SaaS metrics that people should follow, and just putting a quote, and this is what startups or startup founders should be focusing on. Nothing for the short term, because if you start building something for the short term, it's not going to work, and eventually it will fail. It's a matter of time, maybe 2 years, 5 years. Some companies do fail even after 8-9 years. So there is no guarantee that if you keep surviving and just by taking some shortcuts, it's inevitable to get success. You might be lucky, but you don't want to play or to be in that 1% of those who could scale it just because they were successful or because they were just lucky enough to get there where they would have reached. So yeah, I think also, we are early stage tech fund, so we invest in startups at a very, very early stage. And what I realize is sometimes the founders don't know the basics of some of these things. It is very important. Now, you might be a founder, you might be a product-led founder, you might be a tech founder. That said, you still should be on top of certain things which makes the whole thing long-term successful. So, I don't want to go much into it, but I think some of those things have been covered. For instance, these are the things that would be more relevant once you cross $1 million or $5 million. But, these are things that would be applicable to at any stage. Whether you are a 5 million startup or you are a 100 million ARR startup, doesn't matter. Yeah, some of the things are basics, but for instance, payback period should be less than 5 months. If sometimes I do see the CACs, people think that, okay, over a period of time, your CACs can come down or your payback period can be much higher in the initial stage. But what people don't know is sometimes, they are not telling the real story to themselves or to the team. You should be clear about what's your payback period going to be. Is it like, 5 months, 12 months? It's okay not having a milestone or reaching a milestone of less than 5 months, which probably at a mature stage you will end up getting there. But having, let's say, a payback period of 2 or 3 years, isn't worth putting efforts in that direction, because you might lose that client in a year from now. Then whatever CAC you have incurred or those costs that you have incurred in acquiring that client, you will end up losing much before you have even recovered those costs, right? So that's on the payback period. LTV to CAC, again, is an important aspect. While your payback period is less than 6 months, but let's say if your LTV to CAC is just 2, what it means is, the customer is not going to stay with you for longer time. So the more the bet that ratio is better, the good it is for you and for the firm. And you can plan these things if these numbers are somewhere closer to what have been mentioned here. Any specific point that you want me to detail out? Because obviously I have mentioned all that as far as SaaS metrics is concerned. Any specific points or questions on any of the things that I have mentioned?
I see some SaaS magic number that, I can't think of formula below that. What is that?
Okay, SaaS magic number, basically it's a, the CAC is the sales effort or the costs that is incurred to get one client, right? That's onto a specific client metrics that you're going to measure. But at a firm level, you would be spending on your sales costs. I mean, obviously the direct cost, which is employing salespeople or probably your sales channel partners. And then you will also be pumping some money into the marketing side of efforts, right? Which eventually, why you're doing that is to get revenue up. So this magic number basically tells you is how effective your spend on sales and marketing is in a quarter. Okay, and I can talk about it later on, but basically what it says is the total sales and marketing budget, or let's say cost that you have incurred in a quarter, is it covering the net revenue that you are adding up in the next 1 year? So if that number is more than 1, what it means is whatever you're spending both in sales and marketing and every other cost, are you able to generate that much of revenue or not? Okay. Now, you will see some people saying greater than 0.75 is good, but for Bessemer in US, they have a hard benchmark saying that the startups that they would like to fund, they want to see that number as greater than 1. Which technically means you are at least recovering all the costs that you are incurring as far as to generate the net additional revenue that we would be making in that year. A rule of 40 is not for early stage, it's for a later stage. Basically what it says is your revenue growth rate plus the profitability should be, if you add that up, it can be 40. But then there can be permutations and combinations. For instance, an early stage startup, which we all know won't be making profits, they can grow at 30-40% without having that any EBITDA or profit level. So you can tweak that ratio depending on what stage you are in. For a 1 to 5 million, I think, keeping that profitability at 0 but growth rate at 40. And if you look at it, when you grow at 40 is when you can double your revenues or triple your revenues in a year, which is what is another thing that is like, D2 and T3 or D3 and T2. So, if you have to double or triple in the first 2 years, you have to anyway grow at 40-50% month on month. Yeah.
Sorry, I came late, so sorry if I missed this, but CAC, LTV, all of these metrics, right? When should you start tracking them? Like when you hit the 1 million ARR mark? Because right now, I'm the one go-to-market person as a founder. So I feel like something like CAC, it doesn't even make sense for me to think about right now.
See,
At half a million ARR.
yeah, I would say as a founder, some of these things might not be relevant to you, but you should start measuring it. Now, measuring it doesn't mean that you will stop acquiring clients where your CAC is higher. That's not what it is meant. But you should know that this is what it is. without even knowing what is that you are incurring, how can you better it, right? So if you have to instruct your team that, oh, look, we have to precisely target CAC to be less than X, Y, Z, you should first know what that number is. Now, these are the mistakes which people do more often than not, where they think that, as we get to a scale, as we get to $1 million, or once we breach a 5 million, these things will fall in place. We'll have CFOs who will take care of it. It doesn't work like that. At the end of the day, the buck stops at the founder's place, and he's responsible for everything. And if he's not able to measure some of the critical things, then how can he, mandate or give mandates to his team to better those things? You had some question? No? Okay. Okay, so yeah, these are the key things that you should keep in mind. I think some of them are for late stage, but I just mentioned it so that you can figure it out and at least start measuring it, even if you don't stick to those rules. And the other thing which I wanted to talk about is pivot. Pivoting. More often than not, again, startups do fail because they don't know somewhere that this is not working out, but they don't want to take that hard call, saying that, okay, they have to pivot now. And this is what the problem mostly lies, because I think there'll be enough indications that will come to you as a founder saying that maybe the market is not right, maybe the product offering is not right, maybe your team is not well equipped to deal with it. But there will be enough indications and signs that you will get over your first few quarters or first few years of journey, which says that you have to do things differently. So, one should not hesitate to pivot. And I think I would take the example of Paytm itself. It was a SaaS company to begin with, less than $20 million of revenue. But somewhere in 2011-12, we did realize that, that side of the business was not going to grow anything further. And if we had to be relevant, we have to do something which is 3G based, which is about OTT, which is about things which are different from what we are doing. And that kind of pivot, not many companies take, but the successful ones, or those who remain relevant for decades or centuries, are the ones who keep pivoting. IBM is there for more than 100 years. It's not what it was doing 100 years back. So, they keep changing. And look at Apple, for instance. It was a computer firm, but initially they said they don't want to get into phones. But today, all the profits that they make, 70 to 80% come from iPhone itself. So, you have to keep innovating. You have to stay relevant. And you should not hesitate to pivot if you think that you are hit a kind of a roadblock when it comes to growth going forward. And again, these are the things, some of the indicators which tells you when and how you should start pivoting, if at all you hit those kind of roadblocks. Well, pretty standard steps, where people go wrong with the pivoting is on the step 4 and 5. Not always your existing team will be well equipped to deal with that change. Obviously, in a startup, there's the founders and the founding team, and then the rest of the team. And you have to think about who all fits into it, and either equip them to deal with the new thing that they are entering in, or get in new talent. So it's not just about the product that, we can build a product and that's why we should pivot. But it's also about whether the team is well equipped to deal with that change or not. Right? And then once the pivoting decision has been taken, it's about whether everyone in the team believes in it and everyone is focusing on executing what you have taken as a mandate. Lastly, on the product, because we are talking about early stage. I'm sure some of the founders here are in early stages of their journey. Earlier, there were like 2 types of product management, right? One is the inside out and the other one is outside in. Now, if you look at companies like Apple, they're completely inside out. They don't look at consumer feedback or what they want. They build products which they think customers are going to use in future. And now, whether it was Mac, whether it was their first iPhone, whether it was their first iPad, they're completely inside out organization. And then there are the likes of exactly opposite who take the product which is outside in, which means that they take complete customer feedback and start building products backwards, right? So you align with what customers want completely and then start building step by step.